Well, the concern over Africa's overall debt burden has some analysts saying that several countries on the continent may not be able to repay their debt. Earlier, we spoke with political economist Patrick Bond, professor at the University of Johannesburg. We began our discussion by asking him to paint a picture of where the continent stands at the moment with regard to its debt burden.
I think we go back to the 1980s when the debt burden exploded because the United States Federal Reserve increased the interest rate. That was Paul Volcker, the Volcker shock. And like the Fed raising rates today, where anyone carrying a debt burden is paying much more for it. Back in the 80s, it caused IMF riots. So it was so bad that many governments by the late 80s were overthrown. After a little wave of democracy and low growth, it was only in that commodity super cycle, really driven by China in the 2000s, that finally debt was repayable, and the World Bank and IMF were persuaded to drop some debt. They had a highly indebted poor countries initiative, and the debt then that was being paid to the mainly Western banks and institutional lenders could then be redirected to social spending. So education and health and other social spending increased. But after the commodity super cycle ended in 2015, we've had a doubling of debt, even after that debt relief in 2007. And so now it's well over 720 billion for the continent. South Africa, the number one debtor, we've just gone up to 173 billion. And in many countries, it's simply unrepayable. And this will become more and more evident as the world recession kicks in. And the IMF and World Bank meeting right now in Washington is confirming that this is going to be some very troubled times ahead.
When you talk about those commodities, I want to talk a little bit about oil and oil producers on the African continent, because a few days ago there was that report that was saying that the IMF was urging oil producers on the African continent to start targeting surpluses and lower their desk risk. So far, there have been
Yes.
reports that Angola is planning to do just that. Is this something, Professor, that you can foresee other oil producers doing, especially Nigeria, which has an enormous amount of debt?
Well, I think the main problem is that the societies won't put up with it. And so protests across the world and in African countries, when that fiscal surplus is sought, which is also the case in South Africa, many protests reflecting anti-austerity after an IMF program. In our case, it was August 2020. And most African countries, this one as well, had pretty bad economic outcomes in the 2020. And even the bounce back in 2021 wasn't too durable, and it depended on that rebound of commodity prices, again thanks to Chinese purchasing. But as that goes into decline after May this year, most prices, including oil, has gone into decline. The tensions with societies have increased. So we've seen many instances, and in one case in Sri Lanka, a virtual revolution when this austerity, this fiscal surplus, as the IMF calls it, the desire to take revenues from commodities and not pass them to the people, but pass them to repayments on loans and fiscal surpluses, when that goes too far.
And let's just speak a little bit when you were talking about that for some countries, the debt that they have now may become repayable. That's actually quite a frightening picture that you paint there. And I just think of Zambia now at the height of COVID in 2020. Zambia became the first African country to default on its debt. However, we did see Zambia's economy coming back rather strong last year. What has that country done to begin improving its debt situation? And could some of those strategies that Zambia has implemented probably be used in other African countries?
Well, I wish there was something durable and encouraging, but unfortunately, that story again relies upon the copper price, which goes up, and it went from a low of around $2 a pound, I think, up to about $5, and is now back to about 340. So I don't think it's a durable recovery because, unfortunately, Zambia still has a primary commodity export dependency, and so we are, of course, hoping that the world economy doesn't crash. But if it does, all of these countries that are primary product oriented, including this one, South Africa, are going to be hurt even more. And